welcome to Down the Road. I've got a really neat story for you today. Jim Puppy's going to join us. He's the author of Dakota Attitude. Now, what's that? Well, it's a book where Jim went around to every small town, not just small town, every town in North Dakota and sat down with individuals from those towns. In many cases, it was one individual, and just got to take a feel of the town and what the town was about. And he put that all into a book, and it's a fabulous, fabulous Christmas gift. And I've got one. It's the perfect book to just sit down and read, 1, 2, 3 stories a night type of a thing. And of course, you're going to open it up to your hometown and where your relatives are from quite fast. So, we'll visit with Jim about that and the process it took to get there. As you know, there's been another school shooting. You've got a school shooting that happened in Michigan where you're sitting there once again ripping your hair out, saying what can happen, what's going on, what can happen to make sure, criminally we can deter something like this from ever happening. The Crumbly family was involved. Obviously, Ethan was the shooter. And everybody's like, well, you can't say that yet. He hasn't been convicted. Well, he's sitting in jail, and they pretty well know he's the shooter. His parents, James and Jennifer, have been charged as well. They fled. They're saying that they were just avoiding media. They fled. They were caught, and they were charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. One of the top defense attorneys in the state of North Dakota is a man named Scott Brand. He's an attorney with Nilson Brand Law, and I asked him to come in and visit with us. He said yes. Scott, good to have you coming down the road with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joel.
Is this the new norm to where parents are going to be looked at? This young man was 15 years old, or is 15 years old, that's been charged with these murders, charged in adult court, by the way. Is this the new norm to take a hard look at the parents who put him in a position where he could do something like this?
I don't think it is. Of course, this is a pretty novel case, but each case, when the prosecutor is looking at what to do, it's very fact specific. And the facts in this case are pretty extreme when compared to others, based on my review.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit, because there's plenty indicators, plenty of signs there that people should have known and saw trouble coming when it came to Ethan.
Right.
Other students, the school administration, everything like that. But what about the parents? If these people knew, the parents should have known.
Well, then the parents were put on alert the day of the shooting. Well, first off, they know that the gun was there because they bought it for him on Black Friday. They took him to the shooting range the next day. Then on the day, days before the shooting, he was looking up ammunition at school, got caught. And then the mom sends a text message. I have it here. It said something like, LOL, I'm not mad at you. You just have to learn to not get caught. Yeah. That doesn't look good. Then you have on the day of the shooting, the teacher found him with a drawing or a note that showed someone getting shot. And then the thoughts keep coming, help me, blood everywhere. Okay, we've got massive red flags for everyone. The school brings the parents in. The parents are told he needs to get counseling within 48 hours and that he should go home. Take essentially a timeout, take the day off, and the parents refused. And then within an hour or two, I believe that's when the shooting starts.
So let's go back to that then, because number one, you pointed out they bought him a gun. What, for his 15th birthday? Was that for his birthday at 9mm?
Yeah, it was a 9mm.
I thought of that at first, and I'm like, what in the heck are you thinking of? I mean, what in the world are you doing buying a 15-year-old a 9mm? And then I thought, the first shotgun my dad bought me and the first 22 were long before I was 15 years old. And so, yeah, it might be different being a handgun. Might be different being a 9mm versus an old 870 Remington Wingmaster. But the truth of the matter is, guns and culture with some families, I'm not sure that they're guilty of any crime for doing that, Scott.
It all comes down kind of to, your family values and things like that. Hunting and things like that, kids possess guns long before, as you said, they're 15. But if your child is experiencing significant mental health issues, you're not going to put a gun in that child's hands. And if they had warnings even before this incident at school, they really need to take a hard look at themselves buying that gun. And at the very least, if they buy the gun, it needs to be locked up and in parental supervision.
Well, clearly they were very cavalier about it. In other reports, the neighbors saw what was happening. They were leaving him at home at times, and they were going off to the bar. Child services had been called because here this young boy was being neglected, and the neighbors had it. You know, they had just had it. And so there's all types of indicators there that the parents weren't parenting. And so when you look at the responsibility that the young man holds, now being tried in adult court, is that the new norm as well? You know, for a 15-year-old to go to adult court and face enough adult penalties for this?
If he's acting like an adult, I strongly believe that they will be moving him into adult court. And that's I'm going to sound like a broken record, a very fact-intensive search on a case-by-case basis. And this prosecutor clearly felt that trying this 15-year-old boy in adult court was the appropriate action to take.
So what does that mean, Scott, in terms of the changes for him, for this individual who did the shooting? By being moved into adult court, what changes versus being in juvenile court?
Penalties. He's looking at a lot more time, probably life. Sorry, I didn't look up that particular Michigan statute, but I'm sure he's looking at life imprisonment now, where that more than likely wasn't an option in juvenile court. Okay,
so let's go back to his parents a little bit. You know, his parents buy him the 9mm. They've already proven themselves to be bad parents. There's signs here. There's messages there. You know, clearly they're not doing what they should be doing as a parent, but yet they weren't the ones that pulled the trigger. You know, they're
Right.
not the ones who said, you know, they didn't say go out there and shoot your fellow students. So, you know, when we talk about manslaughter, you know, involuntary manslaughter, what does that mean?
So I looked up the law here prior to the interview, and basically there's 3 elements. One, the death has to be caused by the defendant. So the jury, if this goes to a jury trial, will have to decide, was the death caused by the parents? Without legal justification, obviously they have no self-defense claim or anything like that, while the defendant was acting in a grossly negligent manner. Which brings up the next question, what's grossly negligent? I think that's what the jury's going to have to pin their decision on. And that means that in an ordinary mind, that omission to use care and diligence to avoid threatened danger is likely to prove disastrous to another. So did they act in a manner with such a lacking of care that it was likely to prove disastrous to another human being? And that's the hard part, where the facts are going to meet the law. You have to decide as a juror member, do the facts that you and I've talked about match the law that we just talked about as well?
So you're a defense attorney. These individuals are the type of folks that call you and say, hey, I've got a $500,000 bail here. You know, I need to find a bondsman to get out of this jail, but I need
Right.
you to represent me. I'm curious, you know, what type of case you're going to make. You know, if you were these individuals' defense attorney, what would you be telling the judge to number one, get them out of jail, number two, to either get the counts lowered or get the whole thing forgotten?
Well, that's a 2-tiered question. For arguing for bail, you have to say that the parents are not a risk to society and they're not a risk to flee. Okay, the second part,
And they already fled.
They've got a pretty damaged case.
Yeah.
They're trying to say that they weren't fleeing, but in my experience, when someone calls me and says, hey, I've got a warrant, the first thing I'm doing is I'm contacting the prosecutor, I'm contacting the court, and I'm setting up a court hearing to get that warrant taken care of. Mm-hmm. And I do that multiple times a year for my clients, and we get those warrants taken care of so we don't have these awkward arrests of my client, because it just doesn't look good.
Right.
And then what I'm telling the prosecutor to try and lower the charges is kind of what their defense attorney's already put out in the media, that there's more to the story, that you've only really heard the prosecution's point of view. I mean, we're going to dive into this kid's history. Maybe he had been an excellent gun owner prior to this, and we just don't know what caused him to snap on this particular day. Maybe he's done gun safety. Maybe he hasn't had any prevalent mental health issues that we've seen yet. But you've mentioned they've had some issues already with social services. And then, again, I'd probably bring that back and say that's on me as a parent, but that doesn't make me liable for someone shooting a school. So I would be doing a deep dive into the histories of these parents and the child and seeing what things that I can do to show that they were decent parents who had no or minimal opportunity to recognize this was happening.
So, as you go about defending these parents, the awkward position I just put you in, what about the emotions of the country? What about change of venue in the first place? Because everyone, you've got players in the NFL, that are wearing patches based upon this shooting to try to give their support to the families who lost their loved ones. I mean, this is about as high profile of a shooting as you could have. And as now that I've appointed you their attorney,
Yeah.
How do you go about making sure that people hear your side of it? Does that have to be done through the media?
Probably in a case like this, because so much of it is already out there. You're not going to get a change of venue because, like you said, I mean, if there's players in the NFL showing the support, I mean, what do you want to go somewhere else? The whole country knows about the shooting, and you have to prove that having the trial where it's supposed to be in your, like if it happened in Fargo, it's not going to work. The whole jury's going to be biased against you, and that's part of the reason why you probably have to play a little bit of the media game as well. But I don't think you're going to get a change of venue in this matter.
So, do you think based upon the fact that they fled already, do you think you'd get them out of jail and get them to a position where they actually could at least not be sitting in jail in separate rooms, I might add, because they're in the same jail that their son is in, so they're all three of them are in separate rooms. I mean, do you think that you could get them in a position or make the argument to reduce bail in this case?
I think you can make the argument to reduce bail if you can show in some factors that will show that they're not a risk to flee. Now, the judge already did say if they do meet the bail, they have to go on GPS monitoring. I've made that argument for the judge in quite a few cases that we can have a lower bail as long as my client's being monitored. But we also have to be aware that the judge is also an elected official. He or she knows that this is in the national spotlight. So the judge might feel hard-pressed to lower bail at all. There's going to be criticism of him no matter which way he or she goes.
Do you think that in any way, shape, or form, if you're the prosecutor or any others, and they're going to make the case that this is going to deter this from ever happening again, do you think people are going to parent better because of this?
I can't speak for anyone on their parenting side, but I hope this gives parents a good hard look at what you should do for proper gun safety. Because if this gun was properly kept in a safe that only the parents knew the code to, we have 4 lives that aren't lost anymore. And I think the prosecutors, depending on how this case goes, might look at it, and if there's similar facts like this, they might look at charging it.
Yeah. And what did, repeat one more time what the mother text about,
So after he got caught searching for ammunition in school on his phone, the mom texts him, "LOL, I'm not mad at you. You have to learn not to get caught."
I mean, how do you look at, and then they fled, how do you look at these two individuals that are parents and say you weren't part of this? You didn't play any role in this?
Well, I think there's no doubt that you say that they played a role in it. Now, the question that a jury's going to have to ask is their role to this grossly negligent standard that they can convict him on? And then that's the thing maybe we have to have the discussion as society is, should this conduct be criminalized if you're that bad of a parent where your kid leads to a school shooting?
Well, yes. Put me down as a yes when it comes to all of that. I want to go to the Rittenhouse case in Wisconsin, because you have a mother there that drops off her 17-year-old kid on the edge of some bad stuff that was going on, right?
Right.
A protest that turned into a riot, and he and the people that asked for him have appointed him to be a bodyguard, have appointed him to be a security guard type of a thing. That mother, I cannot imagine a scenario where my mother ever would have dropped me off at a young age like that and put me in that position. Did the mother bear any responsibility here? And if this is the new norm in the case in Michigan, should the mother of Wisconsin have been looked at and been charged as well?
Well, again, I think she absolutely played a role, because if she would have done what I think the proper motherly instinct thing would have been to tell your kid, no, you are staying at home. If she would have done that, we'd have people not shot. And so she bears some serious responsibility for it. Is it criminal? I don't know. You have a foreseeability element there that could be an issue. But the one thing we also need to think about is even if she's not criminally liable, nothing stops the three people who were shot from suing her civilly. You know, if you think about way back, world's most famous case, O.J. Simpson, he was found not guilty, but he lost in the civil case. So they can still sue and say that you're civilly liable for what happened on this day.
But in the case of O.J. Simpson, and I don't know how it all turned out in terms of checks being written, but there was the ability for him to have income and money. If you're going to sue somebody civilly and you're going to sue somebody that doesn't have any money, what have you gained civilly?
Not much. Can't get blood from a turnip.
Right, exactly. So, you know, what I'm trying to find here, Scott, is some way after these terrible things happen, some way to really change it under laws that the United States has now. Because clearly Congress isn't going to change our gun laws. They're not going to. If they didn't do it after Sandy Hook, if they didn't do it after these other shootings, they're not gonna. And so how prosecutors can make sure that justice is then brought, that's going to be the hard part here.
Right. And I mean, and it might require certain prosecutors, if they want to go down this route, to get creative. There's all different types of wordings and phrases in the laws. And I mean, this is just one homicide law or one assault law, but there is a wide range in every state that a prosecutor can look at for avenues to prosecute someone. But
you say, get creative. In the Rittenhouse case, the first thing I heard from a number of attorneys across North Dakota, because I know a lot of them, was that they overcharged, that he'll never get convicted of the charges that they brought against Kyle Rittenhouse. In light of what they knew, they knew that individuals had pointed a gun at him prior to him shooting them. They knew, there were plenty of things to point to the fact that, hey, you shouldn't be charging him with murder, and yet they did. And so as a defense attorney, obviously the one in Wisconsin handled that very well. But how do you go about making that case?
Well, I would have obviously brought these glaring problems to the prosecutor and say, hey, you have overcharged this case. Let's look at the elements here. You can't meet 1, 2, or 3, or something like that big. And depending on the case and depending on my client's directive, I can counteroffer and say maybe you should amend the charge down to, like disorderly conduct or something like that doesn't carry such a harsh penalty. And that's kind of the interesting part, because that's where personalities and the law kind of mix. That conversation could have been had, and the prosecutor could have told the defense attorney to go pound sand. Or the prosecutor could have said, you know what, would you accept an amended charge? And the defense attorney could have said, go pound sand. So all those kind of happen outside the view of the public, and really the public never gets to know how those negotiations come to conclusion.
What role does the judge play in all this? Because if you looked at or watched any of the footage of the Rittenhouse case, I don't think there's any question whatsoever that the judge very much leaned towards the defense side and ruled towards the defense side. You've had to be in front of a number of judges, different judges. What role can a judge play, like in Wisconsin, in a case like this?
They can play a huge role, especially if the case goes to trial. That's when the judge really gets involved. Prior to trial, the judge usually doesn't see any discovery or any of the negotiations or anything like that. They just get usually a one-page citation that says, here's what the person's charged with. And then everything comes at the trial. But they are the gatekeepers, so they decide what evidence can come in, what can't come in. They decide, what questions are appropriate. And so they really control what the jury gets to see. And obviously, the jury can only decide on what they get to see. So they can play a huge role.
Guns in cases. I'm not talking about being held in cases. I'm talking about in criminal cases like this. How does that change in front of a jury? If you go in and you get caught ripping off a store, but you don't have a gun, but you get caught in a store with a gun, I realize how you charge it could be different, but how does a jury here in the Upper Midwest look at that? Because we're so used to gun culture here, is that even an issue?
I think that it still gives the jury a little bit of sticker shock, because our culture, it's one thing to be hunting, it's another thing to be pointing a gun at a human being at a pawn shop or something like that. That just escalates everything. So I think our juries would take a crime with a gun a lot more serious.
See, to me, you take a look at, where you're at with the gun playing. As a gun owner who doesn't want to lose gun rights, the best thing that can happen for me is for individuals who abuse gun ownership to be prosecuted to the full extent. That to me is the best thing that can happen.
And if those people are prosecuted, there are a lot of crimes out there that end up with the individual losing his or her gun rights. So that is happening. And then there is a petition, too, to get your gun rights restored if you were convicted of one of those crimes. But that will go in front of a judge, and then the judge will have to make the ultimate decision as to whether or not your gun rights can be restored.
But you have to work with law enforcement all the time. You get to talk to them. I mean, how do they even enforce something like this? If they were to pull Ethan Crumbley's gun rights, for example, 3 years from now, are they going to know whether he's got a gun or not?
From my experience, usually it's not like they're coming around knocking on someone's door, but if there's another reason to be in the home and a gun is found, there is a separate charge for being like a felon in possession of a firearm. And depending on how that goes, that can carry some very serious consequences.